All right, folks, we're going to dive right in. Really good to have everybody. We have quite a few people registered and attending right now. So thanks everybody for tuning in. As I mentioned before, we're here with the Exotic Wildlife Association Executive Director, Charly Seale. Charly, thanks for joining us today.
Well, I appreciate you having us, and I know that there's a great interest right now in the exotic industry, and I really appreciate the Texas Deer Association showing and sharing that interest.
Yep. So let's just talk a little bit about EWA. Exotic Wildlife Association was founded in 1967. Your motto is promoting conservation through commerce. You guys are at the forefront of a lot happening with exotic wildlife, not only here in Texas, but across the globe. Talk to us a little bit about the association, and then we'll dive into exotics here in Texas.
Well, the association was primarily formed because of one reason, and that was the traditional livestock associations did not, as the old icons back in the 50s and early 60s started recognizing they weren't taking up the interest of this newly emerging industry. And really, the exotic industry was started back many, many years ago when traditional livestock were not actually paying the bills anymore, and hunting was a seasonal type revenue stream for the landowners, and so they looked for other ways to make money. And these guys going over to Africa on safaris noticed two things: one, that the terrain, the climate, and everything was almost identical to what it is here in Texas. The other was the fact that these animals would do extremely well here, and that the safari style hunting was a year-round revenue, and so that was the kind of the beginning of the exotic industry.
Well, look, we as a Texas Deer Association, we promote a lot of land management, and we promote all different types of hunting, obviously, and game stewardship, and also animal husbandry. And what we're noticing, Charly, is that there's a lot of our ranches that are now bringing in exotics, both common, super, and otherwise, onto their places because it's such an attractant for that year-round sportsman. Talk to us a little bit about the prevalence of native species and exotic species on land these days.
That's probably the biggest question that I get on a weekly or daily basis here, is that, what early on, and I'll just be honest with you, early on, the exotic industry was kind of the stepchild, if you will, of the wildlife associations, and people, you either loved them or you hated them. Those that loved them didn't want whitetail on their places. Those that hated them didn't want exotics on their places. That has all changed in the last 15 years. That has totally changed. And people are seeing now that you can actually have a revenue stream. And that was the thing that we tried to promote early on when we attended the early days of the Texas Deer Association conferences, was that you're missing the bet if you don't have a year-round revenue stream, because even with whitetail, as long as the seasons are, it's still a seasonal revenue. Whereas with the exotic industry, it's not that way. And the guys, I say early on, were very smart about the thing, because they went to the Texas legislature and they had these animals, all these non-native species, classified as livestock, which meant they were governed, regulated by the Texas Animal Health Commission under the Department of Ag, that Parks and Wildlife, the Texas Parks and Wildlife, which regulated the native species, really had no control over that, except for the licensing issue, which still is prevalent today. But as time has rolled along, I think we've gotten, I know with TDA and EWA, we've gotten a lot of crossover members. We share a lot of the membership base, and people are becoming very, very interested in how can I increase the revenue on my ranch. And this is the one thing that we've preached for years, and finally it's taking hold.
Sure. Charly, I want to talk a little bit about that, and want to clarify just one thing you said, just for folks that are listening that may be new. First and foremost, EWA is like our brother association. We are constantly interacting and exchanging ideas with you guys, and we love working with you. And we think our members see value in both associations as well. A lot of our members are starting to belong to EWA, becoming engaged and involved in EWA because of exactly what you said. this commingling of animal species on their land. I want to touch a little bit. You mentioned a licensing issue with Parks and Wildlife. I want to be clear for folks that it's just the hunting licensing aspect that you were talking about. You don't have to license exotic species to come onto your property.
No.
You simply just have to have a hunting license in Texas to be able to shoot any kind of animal.
And really, you don't even have to have a Texas hunting license. They have a small game license that you can buy for 5 days, you know, if you have out-of-state hunters. So they don't have to pay that $300 price tag on that. So yes.
So talk about that a little more, because I don't think a lot of people know that. A lot of people's hunters come in and they end up buying their out-of-state license, and it's quite costly if you're out of state to come into
Well,
Texas.
it is if you're coming to strictly hunt exotics, and that's the non-native species. You don't have to purchase that $300 non-resident license through Parks and Wildlife. You can purchase a 5-day license. I think it's $59.
Wow.
So, and that allows you to kill numerous species, to do whatever you want to do on that. Now, you can't take native game on that.
Right.
Only non-native.
Okay. So let's talk. I want to expand on. I want to start the bigger conversation by saying we were on conference calls over the last few days or over the last few weeks, and we both gave separate speeches on what TDA has coined the intersection between exotic species and native species. Broken down in its simplest term, that is, how do I manage exotic species and whitetail deer on the same property, right? We used to have the conversation about how could you manage for cattle and whitetail deer at the same time? What was property and land management like when you were dealing with that? Talk to us a little bit about what property management is like when you have exotic species, and especially some multiple exotic species and whitetail deer that you're both trying to grow and keep habitat healthy, etc.
Well, you've got to be very smart about what you're doing, and it's like any other land management, whether you're managing for cattle and whitetail deer or native species, or whether you're managing for your whitetail, and you know, things have changed a lot over the years, and more people are getting into strictly wildlife, and they're doing away with their traditional livestock because of the fluctuations in the market. So you have to be smart about what you're doing, and that's what we're here to provide: a source, a revenue, or not a revenue source, but an information source to our membership and to others out there about mix and matching these different species, because certainly these animals are going to compete if your stocking rates, and that's another thing we'll talk about in a little bit, but stocking rates is just like with cattle. You overstock your property, you're going to see the browse line, you're going to damage the environment. If you know what you're doing and you can mix and match those species that are grazers versus browsers, then obviously you're in better shape. And that's what we're here to do, is to tell you what animals will coexist together, and a lot of these will crossbreed. And so you've got to know that as well, because if you're striving for the best that you can have, you don't want Gemsbok in the same pasture with Scimitar horned oryx, for example, because they are going to crossbreed. And so then you're going to dilute the genetics.
Charlie, talk a little bit about where an individual landowner could go to get information like you're talking about. How does a landowner become more knowledgeable on this types of situation that you were describing recently?
Well, obviously, we want you to become a member of EWA, and through that, but aside from having a membership, probably the most knowledgeable individual that we know that is our technical advisor is Dr. Elizabeth Mungle. She knows this industry backwards and forwards. She's got 2 books out. One is called Grazers, and the other is called The Exotic Field Guide. And those books are available online. You can purchase those, but they give you a lot of insight into what animals will coexist together very well. But it's just like anything. You overpopulate. You can run axis and whitetail together. Do they compete? Absolutely. But you keep those numbers in check, and you have no problem with that, because axis, for example, are primarily grazers. but they will also browse and take away the food supply, the food sources that the whitetail have. But you also have to keep those numbers in check. Let them get out of hand, and you've got a problem.
Sure. I think that's probably rule number one of any game management, whether it's whitetail or exotic or anything, is you have to keep your numbers in check and you have to keep a close eye on your habitat.
Exactly.
Make sure it's sustainable.
But one of the things that, in talking about that same line, is that a traditional cattle unit, and that's what a lot of people talk about, animal units. Animal unit is one cow, one calf, okay? You can run, for every cow you can run on the pasture, I can run 7 axes. And the price is, I'm going to make about 5 times of what I would make off of that cow, generally. So that's why people are turning more. And if it, say in this part of the country, one cow, one animal unit to 30 acres, 35 acres, and sometimes more in drought situations, I can still run those 7 axes in that same land capacity.
Yeah, I know you get invited to speak at a lot of seminars, as do I, and we consistently have this conversation about making land profitable today. And across Texas, I think the rule still applies in most areas of Texas, that it is just becoming harder and harder to make a profit with traditional livestock off of land. We are finding that, especially with land fragmentation. We in our last webinar, we talked about that with Sheldon and Mark, about land just continues to get divided. It seems like it rarely gets folded back into one another, and it becomes, at prices today, it becomes harder and harder to not only pay debt service on your land, but also generate a revenue, a profit with traditional livestock. So we see a lot of people turning to whitetail deer or exotics to try to fill that gap where traditional livestock just can't keep up with the price of land today.
Well, one of the problems that we have, and I guess land fragmentation is a good thing and it's a bad thing. It's a bad thing from the aspect that it's breaking up a lot of these historical ranches across the state of Texas and all across the country. The good thing about it is it's brought more people into the industry. You can take marginal land that's not suited for cattle, sheep, goats, anything else, but it will be suited for native species. It's suitable for exotic species because they can survive, and you'd be surprised the money and the income that you can generate off of just, say, 100 acres of land that you can't do anything else with. It's too small for cattle operations to any aspect. I mean, you can have a couple of 3 head of cows on it, but you're not going to make the revenue that you can make having an exotic or a native species on that ranch.
Sure. So let's talk about the market a little bit. As in whitetails, we have 2 sides of our market. We have a farming market and an animal husbandry side of our business, and we have the hunting aspect, right? And what we call pasture side of our business. The exotics have the exact same thing. Talk to us a little bit about both sides of the market. Talk to us a little bit about somebody who's looking to get in it for animal husbandry and somebody who's looking to get in it to just release exotic onto their property to possibly hunt.
Well, from the husbandry side of it, the breeding side, that is probably the more, we're seeing that more and more, and that's what majority of the folks that have exotics do. They buy a small piece of land that they can afford, and they run as many exotics as they can on it. But then, all of a sudden they want to do it, and we hear this every day. They want to do it for the hobby of it. They want to do it just to look at the animals. What they don't realize, those animals are going to make babies. When they start making babies, they're going to have some place to go with them. And whether they know it or not, whether their business plan ever called for that, for husbandry end of it, they're going to have to do something with those. So that's when the services of our trappers and brokers and things like that come in, and they can certainly make that ranch pay for itself, if you will. Now, on the other side of that, a lot of people buy, they don't care about the breeding side of it. They want it just like in the whitetail business. They want to be able to purchase those animals, raise them, and release them out for their own customers. And then you have a situation of dual income. You've got one on the breeding side because they can't they can't harvest everything that they naturally grow. Then you have it on the hunting side that they are shooting, that and hunting out those larger males and females throughout the year, that they're going to have a revenue from that. So that's kind of the ultimate situation, the same as it is in whitetail, is to have a breeding and a hunting operation, but not everybody cares to do that.
Sure. Before we dive deeper in, we have a question here, and it's a hard question for both of us. What do you say to folks that might tell you exotics don't have a place in Texas because they weren't here, they're not native, maybe they're degrading the land that native species could thrive on? What's your common response to that?
Well, and certainly that's an opinion that we have fought year after year after year. That it's kind of going away. But to answer that question directly, we believe that there is a place for not only the non-native species but the wildlife as well. Again, you've got to keep those in check. Are you throw the balance of nature off? To talk to what I call a purist, one that is strictly, he believes in the native aspect, what was here. But you know what though, Patrick, everything, very few animals are native to this country anyway. I think probably the longhorn steer was probably the only thing I would call a native animal. Now, I believe that that's why the 8-foot fences are here, that we try to promote the aspect of having both native species and your non-native together, because they can coexist, and we're proving that.
Sure. I'll tell you one thing that's just struck me. We were doing an interview a month or two ago together for a different association, and it was really eye-opening to listen to you talk about some of the species that we've saved from extinction. There are species that are sitting on ranches today in Texas that may not exist in their native land any longer. The Arabian oryx is one of them. Probably damas are getting pretty close. Addax we're getting pretty close. Talk to us a little bit more about that, about how we're actually helping the species by bringing them here and raising them and hunting them here.
Well, the one thing that Texans, and I'll use Texans, it's all over the country, but the exotic industry, this is I guess what I'd call the hub of the exotic industry right here in the Texas Hill Country and throughout the state. But years ago, when the zoos were having no more success in raising these animals, they only had so much area that they could put these animals in. So they sold them, donated them to individual landowners. Those landowners did one thing that has made this industry explode, and made not just this industry, but the endangered species explode. They gave them a value. They raised so many of them that everybody got into it. The animals had a value, and with the value in the trade, being able to buy, sell, and trade them, the populations have literally exploded. The three, probably the most famous of the three that we've had anything in recent memory to do with, is the scimitar horned oryx, the Dama gazelle, and the Addax antelope. And the scimitar horn is virtually extinct. It has been classified as extinct in its native land, which is up in northwest Africa. The Dama and the Addax there's less than probably 200 of them left in the world in their native land. Here in Texas, there's literally thousands of them. And again, that's because we had the freedom to be able to buy, sell, and trade. We lost a lawsuit back in 2012 that took that ability away from us, put them under permits. The population was cut almost in half because people either hunted them off, sold them off, or got rid of them. We successfully, through Congress, got a mandate to pull them back under the restriction, take them away from the restrictions of the Endangered Species Act. Now they're probably more than there was. That happened in 2013. Today, there's probably more than what we had before they lost that exemption.
Wow. And I think that's an incredible exhibit of success in the exotic industry is the Three Species Act. That was a huge, it was a landmark piece of legislation for what we do here in Texas. You know, we were having a conversation with the executive director of Dallas Safari Club recently, and we talked a little bit about Texas exotic hunting. And, you know, you watch the news like I do frequently, and we see political strife in Africa increasing daily, right? We see Zimbabwe now is under a new regime, and we're starting to see these countries that have an appeal for hunters being really affected by political unrest. Is Texas, I'll just ask you, is Texas becoming the alternative for Africa, if you will? Is Texas becoming the place that someone might say, I don't want to take a 21-hour plane ride, I'll just hunt right here for those species?
For some animals, obviously, a lot of the prices and we'll go to the economic side of it for a minute. A lot of the prices here in Texas are a lot more expensive. But you know, by the time you get your animal, you have it shipped back to the States, you take your plane ride, you do all the things you do, you could probably have hunted that animal out, and many of those animals could be hunted right here in the state of Texas. One of the things that with South Africa, and we'll use that for just a minute, South Africa was on the verge of total extinction of their animals over there. That was when they were under governmental control. They put the control and made them wildlife as livestock over there, and gave them the ownership, went to the people, to the private landowners, and those populations of animals literally exploded. And if you go to South Africa today, there's still a lot of political strife, but they're smart enough to know that the economy depends on the hunting aspect. And you wouldn't know but what you were in Texas, in many parts of South Africa when you're hunting there. And I know there's probably a lot of guys and women on the line right now that have been there, and so they know what I'm saying is you almost think you're in South Texas or West Texas or the Hill Country when you're over there hunting. You're right about one thing, that as the political aspects of in Zimbabwe and some of these other places, they've taken away in some of these countries the lion hunting, for example, and the elephant hunting and all of that. And I know our president is struggling right now with this very thing on allowing the tusks and the body parts and things to come back with the elephants, and he's kept catching a lot of political pressure from this side of the pond. And so he's kind of put that on hold, I think, for the time being, until he can research it with with the Secretary of Interior. And but I think that the key to this whole thing is these animals have to have a value. Take the value. They're poisoning the lions because they won't allow hunting anymore in some parts of Africa, and so they're killing the natives. And these natives are actually going out snaring them, poaching them, doing the things they do, and this is going to it's going to kill this species.
Yeah, we struggle with that too. We get the sentiment even in the whitetail business about why do you put a value on these animals? Why are you killing God's creation, et cetera, et cetera? And it's hard to describe sometimes how putting a value on an animal is actually protecting it, and hunting it allows for the enrichment of the species. And so I know y'all struggle mightily with that, dealing with exotic species, especially maybe not as much here, but certainly at the federal level. I know y'all spend a lot of time trying to have that conversation, an education conversation with folks up there in Washington.
I get a call at least once a week, Patrick, that from people out here that want to know how we can, they think that we're just a bunch of folks running around slaughtering these animals by the bushel basket. But what they don't realize is that the men and women who are in the hunting industry, this is their inventory. They're not going to deplete their inventory. They're going to protect that inventory, and you hunt out a certain percentage in order to grow more, make more. And that's the thing we struggle with the most with the anti-hunting groups out here, is how can we hunt them and kill them if we're truly trying to conserve them. They don't believe in that.
Right. Okay, Charlie, we're gonna dive into some questions. We have quite a few questions here, and the first one is is pretty obvious. What are the hottest species going on the market right now, and what are some that might be trending downward?
Well, just to say, I don't see any of them trending downward. Just go try to buy some of them. But let's talk in the price on these animals and what's hot and what's not is let's talk about commons versus supers, and that's a term that the industry has taken. And I'll just use axis, fallow, cyca, black buck, things like that as what we call a common exotic. That's because there's literally thousands of them on the ranches across the country. A super exotic are those that there's still great numbers of them, but there's still a higher value, such as kudu, sable, and the hottest thing going right now is ibex and in the goat species. Sable has always held its prices very well. Kudu has held prices very well. The ibex is something that has exploded in the last year or so, and they used to, they were so, but over I'd say the last 5 years, ibex have really come on strong. So if there was anything that was the hottest thing in the market right now, I'd say probably ibex.
It seems like Gemsbok have also kind of increased their value significantly over recent years.
Gemsbok have exploded. Scimitarhorn oryx, so the price has been phenomenal on those as well. Now the price is dictated by the numbers, and so and by the demand for them. Scimitarhorns are very easy. They're very easy to raise. They're very easy to work. You can work them almost like cattle. Gemsbok, they were born looking for somebody to kill. We don't work our Gemsbok through the barns or anything. I don't know that maybe there's somebody out there that's brave enough to do it, but most of those are not worked through the barns. They're chemically mobilized, but Gemsbok value has been very, 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 very good over the last 2 to 3 years. And sable, kudu, again, just phenomenal prices right now.
Good. The ibex is an interesting one. That's an interesting one that seems to be a hot commodity right now.
Well, it is, especially your Nubian ibex. I know that they're well sought after, and I think again there's not a lot of people raising them, and that's why the demand is out there for them.
We kind of downplayed the commons a little bit, but the commons are kind of what people start with. Talk to me a little bit about maybe your easier commons to both get on your property and manage on your property.
Well, probably 90% of our membership started with what I call commons, black buck and axis. That's been the two mainstays, or maybe fallow. Axis are one of those animals that if I had to choose an animal that I could make a living off of, it would be the axis deer, because he's such a diverse animal, and he's very well sought after. There's a lot of free ranging. They estimate probably somewhere around 20 to 30,000 free ranging axis. And I know that probably some of the guys that have ranches out here that they call them a nuisance because they do compete with the whitetail if their numbers get out of check. But because of the prices of axis over the last 2 years, 3 years, you don't see free ranging herds. They're going to get trapped very quickly because of the prices.
We actually have a question specifically on axis that I want to kind of read to you. It says, our ranch is near Rock Springs, and we're seeing an increase in the number of axis bucks and does. They seem to be more aggressive than whitetails, yet seem to coexist well together. Have any surveys been done to evaluate this trend? Is it occurring on a statewide basis?
Yes to that answer. But again, with the prices the way they are, and I think the way the population on the free ranging axis got out of hand was they were not the value on those things a few years ago. You couldn't hardly give away an axis doe. You were lucky if you could draw, $50 off of them, or maybe $100. That now has almost quadrupled. I can sell an axis doe for, somewhere between $350 to $500, depending on the day. Axis bucks, a 30-inch buck is bringing anywhere from about $1,750 to $2,000. And so more people, more of your trappers and your guys that are in the business as freelancers are out here contracting with these landowners to remove these excess animals to keep the populations in check.
And Charlie, I'm gonna state the obvious, but if somebody's listening out there that says, I want to take you up on that, they can call the Exotic Wildlife.
They can call us. We have a list of what we call our trader, trapper, brokers that are EWA members, and those obviously are the ones that I would promote because I know these guys and I know their reputations.
Okay. We're going to kind of go down the list and keep asking questions in the question and answer format. I have another one that an interesting question. It says, I have Barazinga eating me out of house and home. They are very difficult to capture, so I can't find anyone willing to collect them. What are the chances of taking this animal off the endangered species list?
We are working. We've got 5 animals right now, and there are 4 bills pending in the U.S. Congress right now as we speak that have been sponsored by some of our friends in the congressional area up there. Probably the best one is HR 2603, which is it's an all-encompassing endangered bill that will take everything that's U.S. captive bred or born here that's not native. We'll take it off the endangered species list. It should have never been there. That's not what the ESA was designed to do anyway. And we have now got that bill out of committee. It's on the floor. We're hoping that sometime after the first of the year that we get we've got it over on the Senate side, and we also have it 17 sponsors on the House side. So that the Barazinga would fall under that. Now we've got a backup bill that takes in 5 species, which would be the gravy zebra, the Barazinga, the Arabian oryx, the Eld's deer, and the red lechwe. So that's 5 of the hoof stock animals that if that other bill fails, that we're willing to, it's already been presented, and it would answer this man's question or lady's question about what can he do with Barazinga. But again, and I would say this to this gentleman or lady, if they have a problem with Barazinga, there's folks that want those Barazinga, and they can be captured, they can be caught and sold.
So reach out to EWA.
Reach out, let us know, and we'll put them in touch with the guys that want those Barazinga, because there's some big herds of Barazinga out here that if you've got, right now you have to have permits. You don't have to have a permit to possess them if they don't leave the state of Texas, but you do have to have a permit if you're going to cross state lines with them or you're going to hunt them. You have to have a permit.
Okay. I'm going to save, we've had 2 questions on fever ticks, but I'm going to save that for the last because you and I have been integrally involved with this fever tick outbreak issue.
Right.
And let's save those for the end. So I don't want to get away. I don't want to get away with on that discussion right now. Let's save that one for the end. A question we have is, do you see any evidence of chronic wasting disease in exotics? If so, does this seem to be on the increase? And rather than me answering that, I'd like for you to answer that question.
So far, there has been no non-native species that has shown to be susceptible to CWD. They had, in research facilities, they've even injected, I'm going to use the fallow, for example, they've injected the fallow into the brain, down the throat, is not a natural transmit, and they could not get the fallow to be susceptible. As you know, elk, we consider those exotic in the state of Texas, even though they used to be many, many years ago native to Texas. Elk are susceptible. Red deer are considered susceptible, although they've only found 1 red deer in the United States that has ever tested positive for CWD. Sika are in that same family. I think there was a Sika that tested positive in Korea. One Sika that we're aware of, and now I know there's some folks here that have reindeer. Reindeer have shown in Norway. They found 1 or 2 over there that were susceptible, but they're not on the list here in the United States.
Sure, you and I were at the United States Animal Health Association meeting, and we were meeting with some of the reindeer folks, and we were talking about it is getting harder and harder around this time of year. Reindeer are a hot commodity. They go to the shows, they go to parades, they go to a lot of things, and it's getting harder and harder to move that species around the United States for our entertainment and enjoyment. Kids love to see Rudolph walking down the street, but unfortunately, regulation is making that harder and harder and harder to do, and that's part of a shame, considering we haven't seen that prevalence here in America at all in that species. I want to go back just a little bit to talk about the two bills you mentioned in Congress. Part of TDA's and EWA's purview is legislative and regulatory, and it's probably the thing that we consider most important on our priority list. How can we get information out on those bills for EWA to help you maybe get those bills heard or presented in committee and start the process moving? If there's a time and place for that, I know my members and yours as well would probably certainly want to do that.
Well, we've sent out alerts on HR 2603 and also on the 5-species bill as well. And so I would just, Patrick, I share that anything that goes out, I always share with you. If you same with you with me, and if you deem that necessary or if you think that it would be beneficial to your membership, then you send it out. Sure. And certainly these bills, as we get closer, as we start getting closer to the time when these bills are going to be voted on, and the dangerous thing about these bills are standalone bills. With the 3 species, they went in as attachments to an appropriations bill, and that's how those got passed. But we've got these on our own, so it's going to take all of us calling our representatives, calling our senators to get on board and support these bills.
Sure. I want to stay on an unfortunate topic of CWD. You know, we recently found CWD in an elk in Texas, and we have some questions that are geared towards kind of how that might affect movement of exotics in the state. We also have some new regulations that you and I sat on working groups to discuss, where if you're harvesting any susceptible species this year, you have to test the first 3. We know that that's a new regulation that was put in place this year. So red deer, elk, sika, if you are harvesting those animals, then you have to test the first 3, whether it's high fence or low fence, all across the state of Texas. It's the hunter and landowner's obligation to test the first 3 off those properties. But the question seems to be, do you see the new finding of an elk? Do you see any impact to movement across the state or across state lines for elk in the future?
The way I'll answer that is, and I'm going to give you the answer that Dr. Andy Schwartz from the Texas, he is our executive director of the Texas Animal Health Commission, our state veterinarian, if you will. And his comment has been, and he and I had that conversation about a week ago, he wants to wait and see how these new regulations, what kind of testing results are coming in on these. Obviously, the elk that was found is on an endemic area, in an endemic place, an endemic ranch. We want to see if this is an isolated incident. And I think the protocol, Patrick, that we've established will be. We're talking to Dr. Schwartz. They're getting a lot of testing results coming in on the elk and the red deer. Now, sika a little different because there's not that many sika that are taken out here. But I think it's a wait and see attitude with Dr. Schwartz on this. And certainly if the testing is not there, if the percentages are not there, as it is in the whitetail industry, and what folks need to understand, and I know most of them probably on this call do, is that elk, red deer, sika, we don't have the deaths, we don't have the mortalities in those species that we have in the whitetail. So we have to rely on hunter harvest, or accidental deaths or things like that to be able to collect our samples.
Sure. Okay, let's get to fever tick because we have about 20 more minutes left. You and I know fever tick is an extremely important issue in the state of Texas. It not only affects game species, but it also affects our cattle and our markets here in Texas. It is something that's having a profound effect on our industry and the cattle industry. You know, we frequently talk to our regulators at the Animal Health Commission and folks like the Texas and Southwest Cattle Raisers Association about how are we going to try to get our hands around this problem. I would say that first and foremost, we need to stress to folks that if you're in a quarantine area or you're in a fever tick zone, that it's imperative that when you harvest a deer that you actually go and get that deer checked and or any animal that you're taking off of a ranch that might be a carrier of fever tick, whether it's exotic or whitetail, that you're supposed to get that Cape checked for animals. For ticks. We commonly forget to do that, and some of our folks, and some of it just needs to be reiterated that if you're in a fever tick zone, you are obligated to get those carcasses checked before they leave, if they leave, to go to a taxidermist or a processing facility, etc. But let's talk about nilgai and fever tick. That question comes up a lot. What is EWA's interaction with Texas Animal Health Commission, and kind of what do we see on the forefront of the nilgai issue down in South Texas?
Well, as you all know, when you came in this morning, Patrick, we were on a conference call with Texas Animal Health on this very issue. The nilgai antelope we're EWA and our foundation, our research foundation, is doing everything we can to help on that end of it. But being very mindful, the nilgai is probably one of the few animals down there that will not come to the medicated corn like the whitetail are. That's how they're treating those animals. The feral hog they found is not a very good source for the fever ticks, but the nilgai seems to be, and it is in the bovine family, so it is susceptible to those fever ticks, and their range is so great. I mean, they'll range up to 25 miles, and so we've got to figure out a way. They've now we're trying to fund some research on the misting systems that they can set up for the nilgai to put it's not a spray to kill the tick, it's a nematode that they put on the animal that eats the tick. And so, it's phenomenal what they're doing. We're also talking about research similar to what the screwworms were. The screwworm, anybody that's on here that's old enough to remember the screwworms in Texas, you and I were talking about that earlier. There probably wasn't 500,000 deer prior to the screwworm eradication program when they sterilized the flies. After that, it was for the cattle industry, but the byproduct was the whitetail and the mule deer populations literally exploded with that. We're asking, and they're doing research, and we're going to try to fund some of that research, that they do the same thing with the fever ticks, is that they sterilize the males, and this will kill the cycle if it can be successful. So that's a long-term solution. Short-term solution is the population of nilgai is going to have to be reduced, obviously. There's just so many of them, especially on the federal preserve down in deep South Texas. And there's where the balance has to come in between our landowners and our science and the cattle industry. So EWA is being very active with this, and TDA has been behind this whole thing, that we go in and we try to work with our landowners and try to see if we can't reduce the populations down to a sustainable level that will help those ticks, along with the cattle, putting them in there as surveillance type animals that they can we can eradicate that problem. They're also working across the border with Mexico, because that's where the fever ticks are coming from, and we're trying to get Mexico to join in as a partner to fight them on their side of the border.
Sure. You and I have voiced concern jointly and separately about the impact that eradicating nilgai will have on revenues for some of our ranches down there. A lot of our ranches somewhat depend on that revenue to make it by, especially surrounding that preserve. Kind of, are we going to have a public process for input, and where do you see that conversation trending?
That was a topic this morning with Animal Health, and Dr. Schwartz is very, very mindful of the private property rights issue of this whole thing. He wants to have some town hall meetings, if you will, some forums down in South Texas, and invite the landowners to come in. He wants input. I mean, if we don't have the support of our members, TDA, EWA's members, our private landowners, if we don't have that support, then the battle is lost. And, you know, the reason we got involved is I see this as a greater, I fear this more than I do CWD, or these fever ticks. And if we don't, but we don't want a total eradication, and we want to work with the landowners and our members down there to not to eradicate the nilgai. We want to control it and see if we can't reduce some of these quarantine zones down there and get it back to the river.
Sure. I know you would echo this sentiment, but we certainly want to express our gratitude for folks like Dr. Schwartz and his team over at the Animal Health Commission with Dr. Lansford, Dr. Rollo. They have really taken a well-rounded look at this problem, along with many other problems that they deal with on a daily basis. But fever tick seems to be something that is consuming a lot of their time, and they're spending a lot of resources at that agency to try to get their arms around the issue and find a suitable solution for everybody.
Well, and again, what I appreciate about our Texas Animal Health Commission is they're very mindful of the landowners down there that surround that federal preserve. If it was just a matter of those animals being on the federal preserve, that wouldn't be an issue, because the federal people, they could care less whether they're there or not. But we have to be mindful of our landowners that depend on that nilgai antelope for a lot of their revenue throughout the hunting season.
Charlie, we have a few more questions. Talk to us a little bit about the supers market. We have a question of kind of where do you see the trends in demand versus population? Seems like it's easier to get males than it is females. Where do you see that? Where do you see that market happening?
Well, I will tell you this, is that the demand is going to continue to be there. Patrick, the exotic industry is heavily regulated. But I think the whitetail industry is totally regulated, and I think that's one reason.
Some would say overregulated.
Overregulated. That's what I'm looking for. I think as more and more regulations pour down on the whitetail people, they want to expand their not do away with their whitetail markets, because that's always going to be here. The whitetail market and breeding industry, hunting industry will always be part of Texas. But I think people are looking for other revenue streams. The supers are certainly where you put your money, but I think if you want to, draw big dollars in, but that's a large investment that you've got to gamble. And I tell anybody getting into the exotic business to dabble in it. Start small. Start with your commons first. Now, some people may say, nope, I want to throw money out there and I want to buy the best I can. Well, that's great, because the market's going to do nothing but get better. And back to the question about males, I don't need but one male, on most of my species, but I need a lot of females to keep growing those babies. And that's why you see, especially in the super end of it, people are real reluctant to put their females out there. And when they do put a female out there, she draws a high price.
Do you see that continuing? I think that's the question is,
oh yeah,
the demand continues to go up and the population can only go up so much by the amount of babies we have every year. Do you see that trend continue?
I do. I think that the exotic industry, it has not plateaued yet. It's going to continue to grow. As more and more people get into the industry, more and more, we talked about land fragmentation, more and more of these ranches are chopped up, people buying their little small part of the pie. I think that they're looking for these animals. They want those animals, and that demand's going to be there.
This is a hard question for either of us to answer as the executive director of a member-based association, but one of the questions is, if I'm looking to get in, what are the steps I might take, or who might I contact to get in the business in the right way, in the right manner? Taking the who should I contact out, besides please become a member of EWA. Talk about the steps of somebody that wants to possibly buy both commons or supers. What steps should they take?
Become a member of EWA. Seriously, if you want to get into the business with the right people, unless you know some folks that you can deal with, my background for 30-something years was in law enforcement. I know a lot of the crooks and the thieves out here, and there's many crooks and thieves in the deer business or the exotic business or the cattle business or the horse business. And I'd say get with somebody that you trust, that knows the industry. And I can't think of a better way than to join the TDA or the EWA to steer you that right way, because we both have great ethics committees that are not going to let a lot of things go unchecked if we can. But that's would be my suggestion, is to get with somebody you trust, and don't put out a large investment until you're comfortable knowing what you're getting into. You need to, work with some folks, work with them. And the thing I see a lot, and I'm a new dark distributor here, we'll see somebody come in buy 100 acres, high fence it, and come buy a dart gun. That's just the wrong way to go about it. They don't know what they're doing with that. They think we can sell drugs and all that. There's a process that you need to go through. You've got to pay your dues, so to speak. But find somebody you can trust, and that's in the industry that can lead you the right way.
Charlie, we've spent a lot of time talking about issues that may impact our associations. We've got about 8 minutes left. Talk to us about anything that you might want to convey to your membership or to our membership, or just folks listening. Is there anything out there that is on the tip of your, or on the forefront of your decision making, that you've been wanting to express?
Well, I think probably the biggest thing is, this country is on the verge of losing a lot of our private property rights. We've lost a lot of our private property rights. And I think that if there was anything that I could convey to both association members, is that support your association, support it with your volunteer work, support it with your finances. But Patrick, guys like yourself, our boards, myself, we're on a daily basis fighting to keep the rights that we have. And we cannot let the government, we cannot let the things that are going on today erode those private property rights. Because I see, the things that I could do as a young boy growing up, I can't do anymore because of restrictions. And we have got, there's got to be a first line of defense. And I see that through our trade associations. And that would be the thing I would say: get involved, get others involved. If you sell to somebody, sell your deer to somebody, sell your animals to somebody. When I sell animals, I always, if they're not EWA members, I take them a membership along with the animals that I'm delivering to them, and ask them to join. And so that's what I'd say: support your associations.
Sure. Folks, thank y'all very much. We've gotten through all the questions. We've gotten through our time here today. I really want to tell all of you that attended, thank you. We had a huge attendance today of nearly 155 people. So really, really large attendance, folks listening. For those of you wondering, if you know someone that wanted to get on that was not able to get on, we will have this to share. We will have the recording to share. EWA will share it, TDA will share it, so folks can listen in if they weren't able to attend today. Thank you again for everybody who joined in. Charlie, thank you for sitting in with us and doing an interview with us. We really appreciate it.
Well, Patrick, thanks for having us. And again, we fight a lot of the same battles, and TDA and EWA will stand strong together.
Okay. Thank you, Charlie.
Bet.